President Julia Jones and I were inspired by her story. We thought she'd be the perfect person for our chapter's first guest speaker. About a year ago, I was approached by a graduating senior, now alumni, about Network of Enlightened Women, and I realized it was a great opportunity to start something at JMU that I wish I had as an incoming freshman. When I got to JMU, I realized that I was surrounded by a lot of outspoken liberal women who seemed to crown themselves queen of political dialogue in the classroom. They were unafraid to grandstand about their political views, as I rarely saw them face backlash. It was then that I realized that all of my friends, my conservative friends on campus, were men. I had zero women to back me up when I decided to stand up to my professors or my peers and make space for the conservative opinion on campus. Or so I thought. The conservative women I did know were afraid of losing friends, getting bad grades, or getting canceled on campus if they spoke out about their conservative beliefs. Little did I know there was an entire underground community of strong, educated, equipped young women at JMU that were waiting for something like NeW. This past fall we launched. Our chapter quickly grew to over 30 members, and we're growing stronger every day. My goal is to empower our young women to stand up for their values, especially in the face of opposition. And who is a better role model for us than Miss Riley Gates? Riley grew up a very talented young athlete who worked extremely hard to become one of the most sought-after collegiate swimmers. She got offers from many of the top swimming programs in the country and landed at the University of Kentucky, where she won 5 SEC titles and finished her career as a 12-time All-American. All of this hard work, dedication, and drive came in handy when her swimming career came face-to-face with one of the most heated social and political issues of our time, the infiltration of biological men into women's sports. Speaking out about her experiences has earned her the Independent Women's Forum Resilience Award, as well as the Woman of Exceptional Courage Award from the Claire Beth Lewis Center for Conservative Women, and countless other times she's been recognized and awarded for her bravery all across the nation. This year, she shared a stage with some of our top political figures, including sharing her story with state legislatures, including at our own Virginia's General Assembly, members of Congress with Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and most recently, she shared the stage at CPAC with the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Tonight, we are honored to have her here with us at JMU. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley Gates.
That felt like the grandest entrance of all time, ever. Walking behind this big screen. But thank you guys so much. That intro was just so kind. And it is, well, it's so nice to be in front of smiling faces that don't want to just like kill me, to be totally frank. As she alluded to, last week I went to San Francisco State University, which was my first mistake. But I wanted to get in front of people who didn't agree with me. So I agreed to go to this university, to which I was met with an ambush. During the speech portion, very similar to what I'm going to talk to you guys about, it was relatively civil. Obviously there were protesters in the room at the time, and they heckled, but it was okay. But it was after the speech, after the questions, when an ambush entered the room. They turned the lights off, they rushed forward at the podium just like this, and they essentially attacked me. I then left the room. Sorry, let me look. Yeah, I'm just gonna carry this. I was able to walk out of the room with the help of an officer, to which I couldn't actually evacuate the building because there was a mob on both sides of the hallways blocking the staircase. So I got barricaded in a room for 3 hours where they negotiated my safe passage home. They demanded I pay them money if I wanted to make it home safely. They yelled terrible, obscene, vengeful, hateful things for 3 hours between this door. They were outside, I was on the inside of this room. Things such as, trans rights are under attack, what do? We fight back. Or, if you didn't want the smoke, why did you come to this campus? You deserve this. All of these terrible things. But all of that to say, I'm so glad to be here. This campus is like beautiful. Why have I never seen it before? It's gorgeous. It's such a nice day. And again, it's just nice to see smiling faces. But a little bit about me. I graduated from the University of Kentucky last year, where I got my degree in human health sciences and health law. I had every intention of this year being in dental school. That's always what I thought I was going to do, was pursue actually endodontics, which is root canals. But clearly, I am not doing that right now. I kind of realized that dental school will always be there, but the relevance and the importance behind the issue I'm talking to you guys about, it's not going to always be there. And being someone who saw what's at stake firsthand, I knew it would be a disservice, not just to myself, but to the next generation of female athletes, the present generation of female athletes who have their voices silenced. And of course, the past generation who fought relentlessly for Title IX, if I didn't use my platform and my voice and my testimony to fight this, to make positive changes. And so now a little about my swimming career. I started swimming at the age of 4. I'm 22 now, so I dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport. But by the time I turned 8, which is 2nd grade, my summer league coach said, you should really consider swimming year-round. And so I started swimming year-round, which meant that in 2nd grade, you're swimming 2 hours every single day. And it really only got harder from there, because by the time you get to middle school and high school, you're practicing before school, then you're going to school, you're shoveling food down in the car on the way back to practice that afternoon, you come home from practice, you eat your dinner, you do your homework, you ice your shoulders, and you go to bed, and you wake up, and you do it all again the next day. And that's not to say that anyone forced us to do this, but it's just what we knew we had to do. We were willing to do this to compete at that top level. And so junior year of high school rolls around, I started the recruiting process, and to be totally transparent, I really could have gone anywhere in the country to swim. I was extremely blessed, and so my whole middle school on, I swore I was going to be a Florida Gator. I'm sorry guys, but I think the SEC is the best conference. And I swore I was going to be a Florida Gator. My dad, he played SEC football. My mom, she played softball. All my uncles were SEC football players, and so I knew that the SEC was the place for me. But I took my trip to Florida, and it just didn't feel as if I maybe had worked up in my head, I guess. And so my boyfriend at the time, actually, he was a big Kentucky fan. And so I thought, it'd be a pretty cool girlfriend thing to do if we went on a recruiting trip and I got to take him to a basketball game. I could totally milk this. And I reached out to, or the coach reached out to me, and I said, I'd love to come on a trip thinking free basketball game. But really, I went there and I fell in love with the university. I fell in love with the campus, with the team, the coaches, the resources outside of just the athletic resources. And ultimately, I committed there kind of on a whim. I didn't even tell my parents. I just called the coach and I was like, hey, I want to come here. He's like, you do? They weren't a fantastic swimming school at the time. And so I think he was pretty surprised, and I was pretty surprised, but I just felt so called to go here. And looking back, there couldn't have been a better school for me. And so I was proudly able to finish my career at the University of Kentucky as a 5-time SEC champion. I'm actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, which explains my really big shoulders that I like to cover with my hair a lot of the time. But 2-time Olympic trial qualifier, 12-time NCAA All-American. I was the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, the SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. But all of that to say, I know none of that would have been possible without the women's sporting category. But I arrived on campus my freshman year. It was a lot of adjusting. We began swimming 6 hours every day right off the bat. And that was hard for me. I had trained hard my whole life, but 6 hours a day, 3 of those hours were before 8 a.m. So I think my entire freshman year, I was just totally wrecked. But then I come back sophomore year, and I finally just developed this sense of consistency, and I was able to really have this breakout season. I was doing really great things. And then March of 2020, it's when our NCAA championships were meant to take place, but COVID had different plans. And so about 3 days before our national championships, we were all sent home very suddenly. We had worked all year to get to this meet. 3 days before it canceled. And so our coaches, they took us back to this little team room and they said, guys, we're gonna have to send you home. And so I was secretly like, yes, we get to go home. This is gonna be so fun. We never get a break. we were at school all summer, all Christmas, all Thanksgiving. We only get 1 week off in August each year. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be so fun until about day 2, and I was like, okay, now what? There was no pools open, there were no gyms open, everything was shut down. But I knew we were gonna have to come back to campus eventually, and I knew I would have to continue swimming at some point. So it was pretty stressful, how can I keep getting better if there aren't a lot of resources to allow for that? And so I'm very fortunate that I'm from Tennessee, where there's lakes everywhere. And so every day for months, the 2 or 3 months we were at home, I put on a wetsuit and I swam miles aimlessly in the lake, just hoping, praying that when we finally came back, I would be in a spot that I was at an advantage to my competitors, which is pretty much exactly what happened. My junior year, we were able to come back, and it was like I hadn't had a break. I picked up right where I left off, and I continued this breakout season. In my junior year, this was the first year that I won an individual SEC title. NCAA's rolled around, and this is when I finished 7th in the country. So I was pretty proud of this, to be top 7, but I knew I could do better. And so this is when I set the goal to win a national title, meaning becoming the fastest woman in the country in my event. And so senior year finally rolls around. It's my last year, I'm ready to give it my all. And it looked as if I was going to get my chance to win a national title, because about halfway through our season is from September-ish to March. So halfway through our season, about in November, December, I'm ranked 3rd in the country, behind one amazing female athlete who I knew very well. Because like in most sports, your top tier athletes know of each other, regardless of where you compete in the country, because you've grown up competing against each other. Again, regardless of where you compete, and if you don't know each other personally, you know each other's names. And so the girl who was 2nd, I knew very well. But the swimmer who was ranked 1st, I had never heard of before. And of course, this was the first time I became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas. And so there were a couple red flags in my head, again, unbeknownst to me, that this was not a female. The first red flag was that this was a senior. It's pretty rare, actually it's never heard of, to have someone come out of nowhere their senior year to become the fastest in the nation. 2, this swimmer was from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that historically produces very fast swimmers. So that was kind of a head-scratching moment. 3, this person was ranked at the top in everything from the 100 freestyle and all of the freestyle events in between till the mile. The 100 is a sprint, and the mile is, of course, long distance. And so think of your Olympic runners. Your best 200-meter runner is not your best marathon runner. They're totally different systems. And so that in and of itself was an anomaly. 4, this person was leading the nation by seconds. That might not sound like a lot, 1 second, 2 seconds. But in swimming, this is a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second. So to have someone leading by multiple seconds was crazy. And it wasn't until a few days after these nation-leading times were posted that an article was posted disclosing that Leah Thomas, very briefly in this article, like a brief little blurb of a sentence as if we were supposed to skip right over it. Leah Thomas was formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before transitioning to the women's team, then carried on. And so I read this, and then I read it again, then I read it again, and I was like, wait, Leah Thomas isn't a female? And I talked to my coaches about it, I talked to my team about it, and we were all, of course, shocked by this. But truthfully, when I read it, I felt a sense of relief, because I was able to then look up who Will Thomas was. Because I was curious, was this someone who went from ranking 1st to continuing to rank 1st? Which was not what we saw. This was not a lateral movement by any means. This was someone who the year prior was ranked 462nd at best nationally among the men. And so when I saw this, went from 462nd, mediocre, to now trailing the women, I thought the NCAA would see it exactly how I saw it. Nothing opinionated, nothing hateful about this. The facts of it, the statistics, what's on paper. But that is not how the NCAA saw it. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with allowing Leah Thomas to compete with the women. And so they went back and forth on their guidelines, if Leah would be able to, if Leah wouldn't be able to, and about 3 weeks before our national championships, the NCAA announced that Leah Thomas would in fact be competing with the women. And so I got to personally witness and feel the effect that this infringement had on us as female athletes. And I know it's impossible to speak for every single person on that pool deck, and I don't claim to speak for every single girl on that pool deck, but I can wholeheartedly attest that I speak for the overwhelming majority of us, because I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw from the 9th and 17th place finishers who missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's someone of the opposite sex exposing male genitalia in your changing area. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the talks and the grumbles of frustration and anger from these girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire life to get to that meet. And so that first day of competition came, and it was the 500 free, which is an event that's too long for me, so I'm not doing that one. So I got to sit on the side of the pool deck and watch. And for those of you who don't know really how swimming works, you swim in the morning prelims, and then you have to qualify top 16, as I mentioned, to make it back for finals. And so I'm standing on the side watching this race go on, and there's several heats in the morning. And so one of the girls, my team, University of Kentucky, we were sat next to Virginia Tech. And so this girl who swam for Virginia Tech, she had just swam in one of the previous heats. Her name is Reka. She's a 5th year. She's from Hungary, actually. But she said she wanted to stay and do her 5th year. We got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID, and why anyone would take it, I don't know. But she did, and I asked her, why'd you stay your 5th year? And she was like, oh, I wanted to become an All-American. And so she had just swam that morning, and she's watching the results to see how the rest of the heats play out, to see if she'll make top 16. And so she's standing beside me, and we're watching this last heat. And of course, Leah Thomas dominates, beats all of the women by multiple seconds again. And she's looking at the results, and she sees that she placed 17th. And so she grabbed me, and I knew her, but not overly well, and she grabbed me, tears flooding down her face, and said, I just got beat by someone who didn't even have to try. And that's when my feelings kind of shifted, because up until this point, I felt kind of just mad about it all. I felt frustrated that the NCAA didn't see it as unfair. Not mad at Leah Thomas, because Leah was following the rules. I felt frustrated with the NCAA. But when Reka said this, it felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It felt like heartbreak. And that's when my feelings really shifted to see, exactly how this is affecting women, to see her cry like that. And so that night came, and Leah, again, swam to a national title, beating many U.S. Olympians, beating American record holders, beating the most impressive females this country has ever seen. And so that next day of competition was the day that Leah Thomas and I raced in the 200 freestyle, to which, almost impossibly enough, resulted in a tie. I won't say ties never happen, but ties are really rare, especially in a longer event like a 200. I believe our time was 1 minute and 43 seconds and 52 100ths of a second. And so we touched the wall, we tied. After this, we get out and we go behind the awards podium where they'll march you out, you get your trophy, you're named an All-American, everyone claps. And so we go behind the podium, and the official looks at both Thomas and myself and says, great job. You guys tied, and we don't really account for ties, so Leah gets to take the trophy. What? That was my response too. And so that's exactly what I said. I asked him, why? Why? What's your thought process here? Is there a reason why you're adamant Leah takes the trophy over myself? And the official says, oh, well, he was taken aback by this because up until this point, no one had questioned anything they had done. And so he kind of stumbles on his words, and he's, well, we're just doing this in chronological order. And I said, okay, well, what are you being chronological about? Because we went at the same time, and technically G comes before T, but whatever. And he said, well, for photo purposes, Leah has to have it. You can pose with this one, but you'll give it back. You go home empty-handed, Leah takes the trophy. And that is when I realized I had had enough. Because up until this point, I knew the unfair competition was wrong. I knew the locker room aspect was wrong. But when this official reduced everything that not just myself, all of us, when he reduced everything that we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings of a male, that's when I knew it was time for someone to stand up. Because up until this point, I was waiting for a coach or some other swimmer or a parent or someone within the NCAA or someone with political power, someone who is supposed to be protecting us, to protect us, to stand up for us and say that this was wrong. I know we're adults, but it felt like there was someone else who should have been in place to stand up before it took me to stand up. But it finally hit me. If we as female athletes weren't willing to stick up for ourselves, how could we expect someone else to stick up for us? And so that's what's really thrusted me into this position. And I know I touched on the locker room. I do kind of want to hit on it again because I think it's really important, because I think it's something the media doesn't like to cover. Both left and right leaning sites, I think the locker room scene is a bit explicit, so it's typically left out. I'll kind of set the stage of a swimming locker room. First of all, it's not a place of modesty. If anyone swam in here growing up, you probably get that. These suits you put on, they look like they would fit an infant outside of the water when they're dry. They're so tiny, so it's a lot of squeezing and prodding and pulling, and your nail beds are bleeding by the end of it because they're getting rolled up in the suit. It's a process. It takes about probably 15 minutes to put these suits on, 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. And of course the locker rooms are uncomfortable in general. But growing up as a swimmer, you almost become comfortable being vulnerable in that environment. And it's a place of buzzing and chatter, especially at the NCAA meet, because you get to see your friends from all over the country who you haven't seen all year. So there's lots of chatter, lots of talking and laughing, and it's a fun environment. Weirdly enough to say locker room's fun, but it kind of is. But I can't even express to you the feeling of awkwardness, really the subconscious need to want to cover yourself when someone of the opposite sex walks in, and you had no idea you would be sharing this changing space. It's a feeling of embarrassment, of course, awkward, as I mentioned, it's uncomfortable, it's belittling, but really it feels like betrayal. Because again, were there not people in place to protect us from this? Which still blows my mind. And again, we were not forewarned. No one asked for our consent in this situation, and we did not give our consent in this situation. And so when this was first made apparent to us, I immediately left the locker room. And I went up to one of the officials on the pool deck and I said, I understand the guidelines for the competition. It was 1 year of hormone suppression at the time. But what are the guidelines that allowed us to share a locker room with the opposite sex? And the official says, oh, well, word for word. We actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex, which meant that any man could have walked into our locker room. Not just a self-identifying female, any man, a coach, again, an official, and bare minimum, they didn't tell us that the locker rooms were unisex, an area where we are fully undressing. They put us in a position where any man could have walked in, which just felt like violation of our rights and of our privacy. But there's one more piece I kind of want to mention about this meet that, again, the media, I think, does a pretty bad job of covering. At the same meet where we, of course, had Leah Thomas, who was a male transitioning to a female, we had another athlete who identified as trans, who was a female transitioning to male. Formerly Izzy, now goes by Isaac, uses he, him pronouns, fully aligns with identifying as a male. Had a double mastectomy, swam in a Speedo, which was a pretty interesting sight to see a biological woman in a Speedo racing someone with a woman's suit, but also a bulge in their suit. It was a very explicit scene and made you feel like you were just living in the Twilight Zone. But I say this because if we were basing this off gender identity, which they claim to allow Leah to swim with us, why did we have someone who identified as a male competing with the women? And I can answer this question. It's because Isaac never would have qualified to swim against the men. I think this highlights perfectly how the women's category is at jeopardy, not the men's category. And I want to mention too, as long as Isaac wasn't taking testosterone, because we know that's doping and we know that's cheating, I have no problem with someone who wants to identify as a male competing with the women. Again, as long as there's no cheating. I think the majority of people in my position live your life as you wish. Do what you want in your free time, but don't infringe on our rights. But that's what we saw. I think that story is important to mention. And so after all of this, I thought to myself, I tried to give the NCAA some grace. I thought, maybe these rules were put in place a long time ago. Maybe they'll revisit them, they'll revise them. It happened once, but it won't happen again because they saw how it played out. And I started doing some research, and I saw that the rules that were put in place in 2010, which was 12 years ago. So I was like, that was a while ago. We have more science, we have more evidence that shows us 1 year of hormone suppression won't mitigate all male advantage. After this, a few weeks later, I got an email from my school alerting me that I was nominated for Woman of the Year, which is the most prestigious award for a collegiate female athlete. It's something that encompasses, of course, your athletic achievement, but also your academics, your community service. And so when I got this nomination from my school, I was so excited. We had the #1 WNBA draft pick at Kentucky. We had Abby Steiner, who's breaking world records. We had a national championship volleyball team, a national championship rifle team, and they nominated me. And I was so excited and just humbled by this. But this award, NCAA Woman of the Year, was not exclusive to just women, because a few weeks later they released the full list of the nominees, to which Leah Thomas was nominated. And that's when I realized really how silly it was to give the NCAA some grace, because this wasn't something that happened on a one-off basis. This was something that they were encouraging and they were celebrating. And so I called my athletic director. His name's Mitch Barnhart. He's a phenomenal guy. And I called him. We had a pretty good relationship. And I said, hey, Mitch, this is what happened and this is how we feel. How do you feel if I take a public stance in saying that I think it's harmful to women to allow men into our sports? And he said, Riley, I love you. I support you. I would support whatever stance you took. Speak your heart. Stay true to your convictions. He said, don't worry about painting this school in a bad light because we love you. And I just thought that's what any athletic director would say. And so I kind of said, okay, thanks. Bye. Hung up. But oh my gosh, I could not have been more wrong about that assumption. And I'll kind of get into that in a little bit. But I think we can all acknowledge too, swimming is not a sport that generates a lot of media. But this meet was special because there was so much media, both left and right-leaning sites, outlets, who were at this meet. And they were desperately hoping someone would give them a quote. They would find your name on the heat sheet and they would reach out to you through Instagram or Twitter. They would find your Instagram handle, message you, do you want to provide a quote? To which no one did. So my inbox was filled, especially after Thomas and I tied. And so after my athletic director kind of gave me the go-ahead, I kind of reluctantly agreed to give one of the reporters a quote, and to which the story kind of blew up, unbeknownst to me that would really happen. But I think it blew up for a couple reasons. One of which being, sports is something that just resonates with everyone. It's not something that's boring like the economy or other stuff. Everyone loves sports. Two, I think people were able to see the severity of what we were dealing with in terms of the locker room, in terms of the photo op of the trophy incident. And so this interview quickly turned into Fox reaching out constantly, all kinds of right-wing outlets, to which I pursued for a little bit because I wanted to continue shedding light on the story. And so I answered, I did these interviews, and I very quickly felt like I was preaching to the choir. All of these old men who are watching Fox already agree with me. How can I get to the people who don't agree with me? How can I get myself in front of, those left-leaning outlets? And so I began reaching out to CNN, I began reaching out to MSNBC, I began reaching out to ABC, NBC, all of the things, to which every single one, while reporting on the story, of course, they were covering the story, but every single one responded to me with, "We don't want to give you a platform to spread your hate." Which was hard for me because they were talking about the story, yet only considering one perspective. And it wasn't the perspective of the female athletes who were directly affected by this. And so I kind of continued doing the media and stuff, but truthfully I began to feel like I was whining. I felt tired of hearing myself talk. I'm sure I actually know there's tons of other people who are sick of hearing me talk too. My parents always told me, put up or shut up. You can complain about it all day long, but it really does you no good if you're not willing to do something to make changes. And so that's when I really decided I want to use this platform to make changes, not just complain. And that's when I started getting involved in the state legislature side. I started traveling all around to different states to testify on behalf of any sort of fairness in women's sports bill. I began speaking to colleges because I feel it's so important to get in front of younger people, to open eyes of this generation so they can see how this is harmful to females as well. And obviously the battle is not won, but I'm appreciating the little things along the way. In regards to the state legislature, as I was mentioning, there's been 20 states thus far that have passed some sort of fairness in women's sports bill, Kansas being the most recent. 15 of which include the collegiate level even. At the federal side, the federal level, obviously Title IX, it's a federal civil rights law where it prevents discrimination on the basis of sex among college campuses and universities. We have an administration in the White House right now who is actively working to rewrite Title IX to where it's no longer would be preventing discrimination on the basis of sex. It would be preventing discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And what this means is that men could join sororities, men could live in dorm rooms with women, men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, any one sex protected space on campus. It would of course mean that men could take both academic and athletic scholarships from women. And actually under this new Title IX, which is 700 and something pages long, really, which it's kind of shady if you have to make something that long. Clearly there's some pieces you're hoping someone will skip over. But in this new Title IX, it's actually sexual harassment to misgender someone, but it's not sexual harassment for someone of the opposite sex to be parading around in a locker room exposing the opposite genitalia, which I think is shows the state of the administration proposing these things. But like I said, there are good things being done. One of those being World Athletics, their new guidelines they just released. I'm sure some of you saw. World Athletics is essentially the international governing body of track and field. So any event where you're running, throwing, jumping, walking, anything where you could break a world record in track and field, they've now introduced guidelines that if you've gone through male puberty, you cannot compete amongst the women, which is great. They followed FINA's model. FINA is essentially the same for swimming. And tons of other good things. Different sports are going in different directions, but lots of positive changes being made. But I want to talk about the silencing piece of this because I think it's a big, chilling, really, piece of this. I know I mentioned I was nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year. And so there was a big conference where they were honoring, the NCAA was putting together where they were honoring their Women of the Year. And so I went to this conference, which I did not go in support. I actually created a petition where we were able to garner over 11,000 signatures in just a matter of days, and a legal demand letter that said if you don't stop discriminating on the basis of sex, which again is what Title IX is supposed to uphold, then there will be legal action. And we were able to get directly in front of the NCAA and hand them this letter and this petition, which is the furthest anyone had gotten up until this point, because up until then, I had sent letter after letter and email after email to which I got no response, which I was not surprised. But also at this conference, they had a big convention room where different companies and organizations could buy a booth, and the athletic directors and presidents would walk around, and these companies could kind of sell themselves. And so I thought, why not buy a booth? Why not get myself in front of these athletic directors, talk to them, pass out pamphlets about why upholding Title IX is important. And so I applied for a booth under my name of Riley Gaines, to which was denied. And I applied again under my name, denied. Then I came up with an alias and I applied. They were like, of course, we'll take your money. And so I bought a booth in the center, and I did exactly what I mentioned. I was handing out little bracelets and talking to these athletic directors, little buttons and stickers and different things. And every single athletic director who walked by kind of said under their breath, hey, what you're doing is awesome, keep fighting. And by the first 50, 60, I felt so honored. I was like, cool, they're agreeing with us. But then as it continued, I didn't feel honored, I felt kind of angry. If we're all on the same page here, what's the problem? Why are we catering to the minority if we all agree what's happening is unfair? And so I began asking athletic directors, okay, it's great you agree, but would you say so publicly? And every single one of them said, oh no, we don't want a lawsuit. We have to keep this job because, we have families to feed. I don't want to risk my job trying to stand up to this. Even the president of the NCAA himself, Mark Emmert, who's now stepped down, who after all of this NCAA championships meet, a few weeks after, he released a statement saying he unequivocally stood in his decision to allow Leah Thomas to swim with the women. But when he saw me privately, he comes up and says, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting. And the irony, because he's literally the one we're fighting. But I say this because it shows the lack of a backbone that these administrators have, these people in these positions to make changes. The lack of backbone, the cowardice, the lack of leadership, the lack of authenticity that they have, they're spineless. And so that's what the silencing piece looked like there. They were silencing themselves out of fear. I actually had that meet, our NCAA championships, it took place at Georgia Tech, and I actually had one of the Georgia Tech host reps for the meet send me a screenshot of what the NCAA emailed him before the meet took place. And it says, you are not allowed to speak in opposition of this meet being here or anything occurring at this meet, or else there will be retaliation. And I swear I have a screenshot of it. So they were threatened into silence. But what does the silencing piece look like for the athletes? For the girls who, again, were directly impacted by this? I've talked to Leah Thomas's teammates. One of them actually just sent me a letter 2 days ago who's been pretty quiet. Well, they've all been quiet, but who has not, I hadn't talked to yet. And she sent me a letter highlighting her trauma. And that's the word she used, trauma. And I cried reading this letter, hearing what they went through on a daily basis. But what they went through, they were forced every week to go to mandatory LGBTQ meetings to educate themselves and to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. When they sent an email to their administration expressing their discomfort in the locker room, alongside their parents were on the email thread, their administration responded with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia in your locker room, here's some counseling resources that you should seek. They were told that they are not allowed to use their voice because their school has already taken their stance for them. They were told you will never get a job, you will never get into grad school, you will lose all your friends, you'll lose your playing time and your scholarship if you speak out. So these girls were terrified. They were told that if you do happen to speak out, and any harm whatsoever comes towards Leah's way, whether it be emotional harm, mental harm, physical harm, then you're solely responsible. And so these girls, they felt, again, emotionally blackmailed. They were terrified. Their voices were totally suppressed by their university. And I know I mentioned how my athletic director was. I haven't yet to talk to another athlete who's had the same experience I had, which is why I say it's a blessing I ended up at University of Kentucky. that's what the silencing piece looks like for girls all across the country. They're terrified. They saw what happened to me at San Francisco. That's why they don't want to talk. That's why they don't want to speak out. They don't want to put themselves in that situation. And understandably, it's terrifying. But the parents as well, the parents are scared. These parents don't want to ruffle feathers or step on toes or prohibit, they're scared if they speak out, they'll prohibit their daughter's playing time. Again, a lot of them work corporate jobs to which they're scared they'll lose if they speak out. And so their parents aren't even defending the daughters. But a year later, a year after this, which I want to mention Leah Thomas's time in the 500 from 2022 would have won this year's national championships again by multiple seconds. But a year later, I'm sitting back, I'm looking at this, and I'm realizing it's a lot bigger than just sports, what's going on. I mean, the language we're using is changing. You see places now, even the Cambridge Dictionary just changed the definition of a woman. It's now, you see places that say it's offensive to use the term mother, they say birthing person, or breastfeeding, they say chest feeder. The language we're using is changing. I mean, look at what's happening even in prisons. You have men who are convicted of terrible, awful things, such as kidnapping and child pornography and rape, who realize all you have to do to be a woman is say, I am a woman, who are doing just that, getting into women's prisons, impregnating women, which sounds awesome to a rapist, right? It's happening in Kansas, New Jersey, Ohio, California. In California, in just recent weeks, there was over 1,200 men apply to be women. And that's not to say that all trans-identifying individuals transition solely to win or solely to get into women's locker rooms or prisons or shelters or changing spaces. But can we not acknowledge how the system we have in place would allow for people to do that? For people who aren't genuinely struggling with gender dysphoria to take advantage of women, us being the collateral damage in the process, which I think is pretty scary. And so I'll kind of wrap up by giving a few examples, and I promise you I could list example after example after example, hundreds of them, because my experience is nowhere near unique, unfortunately. And so there's a girl in Vermont. Her name is Blake Allen. She's 14 years old. She's a freshman in high school. She was on her high school's volleyball team. This year, they allowed a male onto her team. Very similar, again, they were changing in the locker room, to which Blake and the other girls didn't feel comfortable, and the other girls kind of nominated Blake to be the one to go and address it with their administrator. And so Blake asked the administrator, she says, hey, is there another arrangement that can be had, because we feel uncomfortable in this space? And the administrator suspended Blake from school. Her dad was then fired from his job. Her school said, the only way we'll let you back into this school is if you write a public apology and read it. To which Blake said no. And then Blake responded with, there will be a lawsuit. To which her school said, oh, please come back. To which she is pursuing a lawsuit. Another piece that I kind of forget to mention a lot of times, because swimming is not a very physically contact sport, there's not a lot of contact there. But in sports where there is physical contact, in a sport where you're throwing something at someone else, where you're striking something, where you're colliding, like soccer, softball, volleyball, rugby, whatever that might look like, typically your team sports, you have to worry about injury. You have to worry about going against a male in that capacity, where you could get hurt. And we've seen people get hurt. Men, on average, we know the statistics, and I could list them all, 60% more lower body strength, 50% more upper body strength. They can throw a 212% harder punch, more powerful punch than women. I'm sure there's some of you who have seen the video of the volleyball player in North Carolina, who, it's, again, an all-girls volleyball team going against another team that has a male on it. The male jumps up, spikes the ball. It looks like it's a rocket, hits the girl in the face, to which she was rushed to the hospital, and even now, months later, she still has vision problems from where she was struck so hard in the face. And I want to mention, the male's volleyball net is on average, or is 7 inches higher than the standard women's net. It's almost as if they're acknowledging biological advantage. Another piece I kind of forget to mention, a lot of women rely on their sport, especially at the professional or amateur level, for financial compensation. It's their income, it's their job. A lot of kind of less known sports, this makes me wonder why I never played disc golf. I don't know much about disc golf, but I wish I would have played, because there's a male who's competing against the women who has taken $47,000 in prize money just this year alone. Same thing that's happening in cycling. Cycling is infiltrated with men competing against the women taking prize money. $1,100 here, $1,300 here, which might not sound like a lot, but it is a lot when this is your job. And so, really to me, what this all boils down to is, it's, in my perspective, spiritual warfare. It's no longer good versus bad or right versus wrong. This is light versus dark, a lot of this stuff that's happening. And I think a lot of it, again, I've done a lot of research on the history piece as to why this is happening, and I think a lot of this is pretty rooted in Marxism, in terms of the changing of language and suppressing of speech and denying objective truth, because that's what's happening. We're denying objective truth. To deny man and woman is to deny the sky is blue. We're denying the sheer essence of humanity. We know men and women are what procreate, and that's how we are all here. And we're denying that. It's as if we're trying to say 2 + 2 is 5. It's like a George Orwell dystopian novel. But we know 2 + 2 is not 5. At least I hope we do. And so I appreciate you guys being here, willing to listen, willing to engage, willing to have this conversation that for some reason can be controversial. I don't know really why. It doesn't seem that controversial to me. Because again, this is not an anti-trans argument. I believe everyone is entitled to play. Every single person, regardless of your race, regardless of your sex, regardless of your gender identity, everyone is entitled to play, of course. I wouldn't want to deny that opportunity from anyone. Sports has given me so much in terms of even things that translate far beyond athletic opportunity, in terms of the leadership and the confidence to feel comfortable doing this, the security to take the arrows that I get every day, all day. I credit that to sports, and so no one should be denied opportunities or chances of success. It's just about ensuring playing where is fair and where is safe. And so I will open it to questions. I would love to answer questions. And I appreciate, again, all of you guys being here, and I appreciate the Leadership Institute and Independent Women's Forum. That's where I'm working now, and they do a phenomenal job of protecting females' sex-protected spaces. So thank you guys. Yes.
Could you go into a little more detail about what Leah had to present to qualify as transgendering?
Yes. So it was 1 year of testosterone suppression, 12 months of taking HRT. To my knowledge, they did not actually check the levels of testosterone. They just wanted proof that they had been taking testosterone suppression for 12 months. We have, first of all, women are more than just a testosterone level. Let me just say that. We're not a certain number you have to achieve. But 2, males can't get down to the average female testosterone level. It's dangerous for a man to possess that low of testosterone. It's physically dangerous for their health and their well-being. But let's say even if a man could have the testosterone level of a woman, there are still advantages that will never be mitigated, including heart size, lung size, of course, the stature, the bone density. There's different things that will never be mitigated. It's more than just a testosterone level. It sounds silly, but men have on average a 40% larger throat than women, which doesn't sound like it would play a big effect. But when you're playing a sport where you need oxygen to oxygenate your muscles to continue propelling you forward, that 40% larger throat is a huge advantage. And that's something that would never go with testosterone suppression. But we know now, even with 12 months of hormone suppression, it's nowhere near enough to get that level even anywhere remotely computable. There's been studies of even years and years, 4 years of hormone suppression, and it doesn't reduce the testosterone level down to that of a female. And I'm not saying that hormone suppression doesn't decrease the levels, it does. But this is my explanation of why it's a mockery of what we do. I spent my entire life, again, 18 years, dedicated to achieving maximum performance in my sport. Whether this be through, of course, my sport-specific training, but also weights, my diet, my sleep schedule, my physical rehabilitation, the social sacrifices. Again, there's so much that goes into achieving maximum performance. When we're going against someone, and again, merely to shave a few 100ths of a second off, but when we're going against someone who is actively trying to decrease their performance, actively giving their second best, how is that right? How is that right? I have to spend my whole life trying to maximize, yet you're already advantaged and you're trying to purposefully decrease your performance. This isn't something we should have to meet in the middle on. And that's my explanation of why it's a mockery for women to have to compete against men. Yes?
Yeah, so I don't know if you said it, but what did your coach first say when, like, they caught word of what was going on in the locker room?
So, my coach, he's like my best friend. We were so close. And he says everything that I am saying. Again, it's more of on a private level because he doesn't want to lose his job, which my athletic director wouldn't. He wouldn't lose his job for my athletic director. But he knew it was wrong. There's so many coaches who have reached out to me who just apologize on behalf of, I mean, I don't know, they just say they're sorry. You know, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry that I can't do anything about it. But my coach very much agreed with me, which was interesting because on our coaching staff at the time, there was a coach who identified as trans. And so it was a touchy subject because I had one coach who agreed with me a lot, and then another coach who I think definitely understood that it was unfair, but it was more sensitive. So I think that's another reason why my head coach was kind of touchy on the subject. But he definitely 100% agreed with me. Yes?
So I agree with you 100% as far as the foundations to this, that it's Marxism, and a lot of people don't understand that's the threat. It's identity Marxism. And you mentioned that the NCAA president, is that his title, was supportive of you, right?
Right.
So where do you think the pressure is coming to him? Is it self-inflicted and he's just seeing what's happening in the culture, do you think? Or you think there's an entity out there that's actually putting pressure on the NCAA?
Truthfully, I think it's just social pressure. I think this, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I 100% believe we're catering to the minority at the elite level, at least. Because, again, just like myself, these girls they've worked their whole lives, they don't want to give up opportunities to a male who hasn't had to. I'm not saying these males who are competing against a woman haven't worked hard. Of course, if you've made it to that level, you've worked hard. But who haven't had the struggle as practicing and competing as a woman, because it's a totally different experience. Men can't understand what it's like to be training through a menstrual cycle or to understand the side effects of birth control on your performance. You know, there's different aspects that a male could never get. And so I think what I believe is social pressure. I think there's the whole DEI stuff that has been pushed among administrations and universities. I think there's this innate feeling to want to be inclusive, which, yes, who doesn't want to be inclusive? But that's not what this is. It's not inclusive to allow males to step on our podiums, taking our awards and our opportunities and our titles and our scholarships. That's not inclusive. It's exclusive. It's exclusive to the very female athletes who the women's sporting category in Title IX was created to benefit. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize. In theory, it sounds great, right? If everyone could compete where they want, but that's not what sports is, especially at that high level. It's not about your feelings. It's not about your, never once did I wake up at 5 a.m. to go jump in a cold pool and my coach look at me and say, do you feel like doing this today? Are you okay? It's not about feelings. It's not a right to be able to play at that level. It's a privilege. And so to allow someone to take that in the disguise of being kind and inclusive is truthfully just a lie. And so I think what's happened is the past few years, I know this has been happening a while in terms of this movement, but I feel like these past few years, especially over COVID, it was really expedited. And I feel like when it began, everyone wanted to be kind, and we gave an inch, but a mile has been taken. And now we're at the point where I think the pendulum has swung, and we will start to restore, but it's just a matter of how long before we actually do. Yes?
Has Leah ever said anything to you about speaking out?
No, never. And again, my animosity is not towards Leah as an individual. I do think Leah is extremely selfish, and I do think that Leah has an utter disregard towards women, and again, how we felt in that moment and how our opportunities were being taken. And so I do think Leah is selfish. After even in an interview Leah Thomas did, Leah said that they would do whatever it took to take a female spot on the Olympic team, which there's only 2 of those, which now FINA has prevented that. But I think it highlights the unwillingness to care for anyone else other than yourself, even though you know what's happening is unfair. But no, Leah has not reached out to me. Yes?
So I'm going to ask you this question because I view you as a role model. As a college woman who has conservative views, and I feel like in our today's day and age that certain beliefs are constantly being shoved down our throats. Like you said, even in my personal life, in my sorority, we have required DEI trainings, and I feel like the other side of things aren't ever displayed. So what kind of recommendations do you have for someone in that position where I want to speak out, I want to have my beliefs, but I am scared.
Totally.
I'm worried that I won't be accepted, that my professors will grade me poorly, and so I kind of have to put on this act just to be approved.
Right. And it's hard. Universities and college campuses, they've totally shifted in a way where they want you to feel uncomfortable speaking your mind. And I've even had instances on papers and classes where I feel like I have to sway a certain way if I want a good grade, which no one should feel like that. And these professors should not grade like that. It's abysmal, really. Your college campus, your universities, that's where you're supposed to go to have open discussions, to have dialogue that you don't necessarily agree with, and to converse. That's what makes people stronger. It's what makes people more unified even. I think they look at this as if it's divisive having these conversations, but we need to have these conversations if we want to unify ourselves and move forward. And so my advice, especially when talking about all of the sports stuff, I think something that typically the left or people who oppose these views, they do so well is relate this back to being compassionate. Relate this again back to humanity. Relate this back to the emotions behind it. And so I think something that a lot of people on the side of the truth can do better is rather than just stating the truth, make it about compassion as well. Make it about our emotions and our feelings. How do we value one person's mental health or one group's self-perception over another's? And there's no good answer to that question. We can't value one over another's. So how I've started talking about this conversation, especially again in regards to sports, is, okay, you talk about the identity of this trans identifying individual, but what about the women? Who asked us how we feel? Who asked us what we're continuing to experience and feel even a year later? And so I tried to make it more, I don't want to say use their tactics because that sounds manipulative, but I really mean it is to use a lot of the same, not language, but same communication tactics that the left likes to use. So a lot of times when someone calls me transphobic, I'm like, okay, well, you're just misogynistic. I found that to be kind of effective, and then it's just kind of like back and forth. But really, I think it's important to be respectful, of course. I think that's something that everyone in this room, I'm sure, strives to do. I know it's hard. It's hard for me sometimes when I just feel so frustrated, because for me, it's so easy to understand. And again, it's not rooted in hate. It's just the facts behind it. But putting out your message in a way that's respectful, compassionate, but not compromising from what you feel. I'm someone who will never compromise from my morals, my values, my beliefs. I stand firm in those, of course, my faith. That's not something I'll denounce ever. But doing so in a way where there can be civil discussion, which is hard. It's very uncommon nowadays, and it's not because people aren't trying, it's because people really aren't willing to listen. Hopefully that was okay. Anyone else? Yes?
Have you gotten an interview with any of the left-leaning, news sites that you said shut you down?
There have been some more liberal sites that have reached out now, to which I've done. Even after all this San Francisco stuff, CNN has reached out in different outlets. And I've been relatively surprised with some of them. Some of them have put out some pieces that they're not totally indicative of what I'm talking about, but they do a good job. But a lot of the headlines the headlines will say of Daily Mail, anti-trans swimmer slams Leah Thomas, which again, is not what I'm doing. That's like defaming me. That's not, first of all, I'm not anti-trans. Second of all, I'm not slamming Leah Thomas. And so a lot of times people won't read past that headline, and that's why people get this perception that I'm out here with my violent rhetoric and dangerous rhetoric. But in reality, it's just getting past the headline and actually listening to what I'm saying. And again, I'm not speaking for just myself. I'm speaking for so many. I think this is, again, how majority of female athletes feel. And so yes, I have gotten some, but it's more so when they want to kind of use it to fit the narrative that they want to push. But that's all media, and I understand that. Yes?
So you talked a little bit about not having nothing against transgender identifying individuals, but having a problem with the policies in place in sports. What do you think should be changed in sports that can be fair to both transgender athletes and female athletes?
So I think one solution to this problem of the unfairness piece is creating a third category, creating an open category where trans individuals can compete. I don't think it's anything that's segregatory. I don't think it's anything that's prohibiting anyone from playing. It's a way truly to embrace the trans community as a community. If you would have said 5 years ago if this would have worked, I would have said absolutely not, because no one would go for this. But I think now we're at a place where this is something that would be viable. I don't know in terms of how realistic it is in terms of finances and the different pieces behind having enough people to play in this league, but I think it's a way that would ensure everyone athletic opportunity, everyone chances for success, fairness, safety, privacy, all of the things. And so again, I don't know how realistic it is, but I think in an ideal world, that's a way for everyone to compete fairly, because again, I do truly believe and wish for everyone to play. It's not that I want to ban anyone. And so I think that's one solution. I think another solution to the fairness piece, this doesn't necessarily encompass a lot of the privacy pieces in terms of locker rooms, and that would have to be kind of looked at, but keeping the women's category for biological women, but opening the men's category to an open division in a sense, because again, the men are not what's at jeopardy here. But there are some different pieces in there that you would still have to look at in terms of fairness. So I don't think there's a perfect crystal clear solution. That's why I think it's important to have the conversations and work together to come up with these solutions. But I think a third category is a way to embrace the trans community and give everyone a fair shot of playing. Yes?
You said that you knew a lot of your competitors even though they went to different schools. My cousin swam at Navy and is your age. Her name's Sydney Harrington.
I know her. She swam butterfly, didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, we swam against each other multiple times. Yeah, she's I actually vividly remember one time we raced each other at Ohio State. Yeah, but totally. But that's the thing, like that's what I'm saying is there's obviously a lot of swimmers in this country, but the ones who have been doing it their whole lives, you grow up knowing these names, you grow up swimming against each other. I kind of remember when we swam against each other, we were like tied at the 150, then I think she got a little tired. Which I was too. Yes?
You mentioned the petition that you presented to the NCAA, the 11,000 names. Were there swimmers on that petition?
Absolutely.
Did they face any backlash after signing that?
No. And that's the thing is, I think they want you to think you'll face backlash. Just like what happened to Blake Allen, where her school suspended her, to which was not ethical or legal by any means. So they want you to think you'll face repercussions. But even in my experience this past year, yes, you do have to be willing to take arrows when you're as public as I have been, and when you put yourself out there, and that's of course to be expected. A lot of the arrows aren't really anything to combat my argument. It's just like, maybe you should have just swam faster. I'm like, genius, I never thought of that. Or you're ugly, or your hair looks like extensions, and that's like, my real hair. So a lot of the things that are said that are supposed to be hurtful don't hurt my feelings. I'm, again, secure enough with myself that doesn't bother me, but a lot of people I know aren't. It would be hard for a lot of people to read these things, but in my experience, I think it speaks more about the person who's saying it than it does about me. But they want you to think you'll face all these repercussions. Doors will be shut. I've only had doors open to me since taking a stance. I still got into dental school. So the not getting into grad school thing, that's not true. I haven't lost any friends. I'll have friends who disagree with me, but again, I'm civil enough to where I can understand disagreement. We can talk about it and just kind of agree to disagree. And that's what that looks like. Even people within the LGBTQ community who disagree with me, who are my friends. It's kind of like, okay, well, we don't agree. I still love you. I know you still love me. We can still be friends. This one issue doesn't have to define our friendship, but a lot of people don't see it like that. But no, they faced no repercussions. No one did. Which I know a lot of people have seen even the past 2 or 3 days, where there was a list of 40 or so female athletes who signed on to a petition to oppose these state bills being passed that would prevent males from competing against women, one of which being Megan Rapinoe, Sue Bird, I believe Billie Jean King signed on, which is ironic because Megan Rapinoe and Billie Jean King and all of these women, they were trailblazers for women's sports and ensuring women's rights and equal pay. Billie Jean King, she's who we have to thank for Title IX. Megan Rapinoe, she fought relentlessly for equal pay for women. And so it's just a bit ironic now that one, they're done playing. They have nothing to personally lose. They don't have daughters to defend, a lot of them. And so they've come out and now are fighting for male inclusion into our sports and spaces. So again, I think if someone tried to take Megan Rapinoe's spot on the U.S. women's national soccer team, she would probably not like that very much. But again, she's done playing, and so I don't think she cares. I think she would rather, again, kind of virtue signal in a way.
How can we follow you and your journey and support you in your journey?
Absolutely. So what I try to do is I post on my Twitter, which is Riley_Gaines_. I always try to post breaking stories of this happening to other females. I try to always highlight congressmen and representatives and delegates who do a good job of protecting this, and also the ones who do a bad job. Just to allow people, I hate saying stay educated, but to allow people to stay educated on what's happening, because again, the left likes to push a lot that it's a non-issue, that it's not really happening. We only have 3 trans-identifying kids in this state. You know, why are you trying to prevent them from playing? First of all, that could not be further from the truth. In states like Texas, I talked to a parent the other day who, on her daughter's middle school basketball team, there was 5 boys on the team. And I said, I'm not trying to fight against co-ed teams. You know, I think co-ed teams are beneficial in when you're learning instructional play and such. And she said, no, this is not a co-ed team. And so that couldn't be further from the truth. So I just try and post things to keep people informed and or educated on the topic. And again, that's Riley_Gaines_. 2 underscores because my first Twitter got deleted. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Ashlyn. I'm here with The Breeze. It's the student newspaper. I had a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So you talk a lot about truth, which I agree. Truth is very important to me as a journalist. But there are also doctors who disagree with you.
Right.
So I was curious about how you navigate that, because there are plenty of people who disagree with you, and there are also plenty of examples that kind of negate what you're saying too.
Right. And this is something that's hard, because something I know, I'm sure, as you deal with in journalism as well, is bias. There's lots of research studies funded by different organizations that are actively polling for different results. And so I know you understand this again in journalism, but there's simply no credible medical professional whose expertise is in physiological development, especially of athletes, who would say testosterone has no effect on performance, and who would say that 1 year of hormone suppression is enough to mitigate male advantage in sports. Even the other day, this was at Pittsburgh, a video of this kind of went a little viral too, but there was a professor in the room who was trying to argue with me that testosterone has no effect. And I want to mention, if that was the case, there wouldn't be doping policies. Women would be able to take testosterone, but there are very strict doping policies implemented by the IOC, which is the International Olympic Committee, and every organization that falls behind that line. But this professor, he's arguing with me that testosterone has no effect. And I said, okay, what do you teach? He said, anthropology. I said, okay, well, did you take archaeology courses? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. He said, yes, I have my PhD. I was like, okay, good to know. But I said, okay, if you have taken archaeology, let's say 100 years from now we dig up 2 skeletons, 1 man, 1 woman, would you be able to tell the difference? And he said, no. We know that's not true, yet he's still someone who has a PhD and claims to have the backing to be someone who's adequate on informing others, to which he let me know very quick. He said, I have 150 years of backing, which I don't even know what that means, because he was not 150 years old. But there are differences. Our skulls, our jaws, our hips, our knee joints, there's so many differences, the density of our bones. Yet he chose to say no, and that's just to highlight, yes, there will be medical professionals who disagree. Yes, there will be studies that show things opposite of what I'm saying to you guys, but that doesn't mean they're accurate. And that's not to say that everything on this side is accurate either. But I think majority of medical professionals, again, whose expertise is in physiological development, would also acknowledge that 1 year of hormone suppression, even multiple years of hormone suppression, will not mitigate male advantage when it comes to anything that requires athleticism or sheer strength. Yes?
Have you read the book Stolen Youth?
I've not.
Have you heard of it?
I've not.
It's the most comprehensive, research-based, annotated book right now in the culture on transgender and stealing youth. I'm very involved in public education, and I write. I'm a journalist. I do a parents forum. And to the comment about the medical community, I've been in a community dialogue initiative recently where we get together and we talk through things, because we need to coexist, we need to find solutions.
Absolutely.
And there is a huge body from the American Pediatric Association all the way through youth medical experts that are now starting to say, we need to stop and just take a look at the research.
Right.
There's an incredible amount of research over time that shows the effect of hormone drugs, of sterility, of loss of bone density, and other things that manifest themselves over time. And the logic from the left is, if we don't let them do this, if we don't affirm them, they're going to commit suicide. They're going to go out and do bad things themselves. But they're now realizing that there are more damages with what they're doing and doing to themselves over the course of time, that maybe we need to sit here and weigh this. So the medical community indeed is starting to look at, maybe we need to slow down on the affirmation of gender dysphoria and just start looking at the real data and listening to people who've been through this. That's a great book. You should get that and get it on Audible, and you can read it while you're listening while you're traveling.
Stolen
Youth.
Stolen Youth. I'll remember that. I'm gonna write it down actually. Yes.
I actually have a question that goes exactly with that. Since you've been playing since you were so young, do you think this is going to like infiltrate to pre-puberty like hormone suppressors or like puberty blockers?
I actually do, because a lot of these guidelines that are being put in place, even FINA, which again is the guidelines I talked about for swimming at the international level that affects the Olympics, their guideline is, unless you've transitioned by the age of 12, you cannot compete against the opposite sex. It's a bold first step, but there's some caveats, because clearly they're stating someone should or can transition by the age of 12. I'm not here to necessarily talk about gender affirming care, but I will say I don't understand how a 12-year-old could quite possibly understand the lifelong implications of transitioning and what that would really mean and look like for someone in their adult life. And so I do believe there will be some shift in that direction, and I get calls from parents all the time. I had a parent the other day who called me and told me that my rhetoric is harmful to their 5-year-old trans child, which broke my heart. I had a parent from Iowa who called me and said their 6-year-old daughter's cheer team, which is basically just pom-poms, right? She said there was a young boy who had pigtails and was flipping up and down the court, identifying as a girl. And so I do think it will start to occur a little younger. But that being said, I do think eyes are being opened, and I do think that hopefully, again, as more examples of this come out and more light sheds on how this is harmful to specifically women, because we don't see many trans men or females competing, especially at the elite level, against other men. And so I think if it continues and highlights how this is harmful to women, hopefully more strict guidelines will be put in place. Cool. I appreciate you guys so much. I really do. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for being here, engaging. It really means a lot to me. This is how we move forward. This is how we go out and make changes. And so I appreciate you guys.
Thank you guys so much for coming. First, I want to thank the Leadership Institute for helping us bring Riley. Can we get another round of applause for our brave girl? I really hope that all of you here were as inspired as I was the first time I heard Riley speak. And for all of my new girlies, I hope you remember Riley's bravery the next time one of your professors or one of your friends starts to spread this deeply misguided misinformation, because it is harmful to women. It's harmful to us. It's harmful to people like your little sisters, your little cousins. Think about yourself on the soccer field. When I was a cheerleader at 6, and I was a collegiate cheerleader here at JMU. So I understand, we all understand the implications of this, and be brave. Make noise, make waves like Riley. So thank you all for coming. If our exec members could stand up, we're gonna grab a picture, and then after our exec members, anybody who is a official JMU chapter member and anybody that asked a question, if you could come up here and we'll get a picture too. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes, so we need to hurry with these pictures, so on to Lake.